Welcome to Withered Words. This story is titled Beast Horn Swamp. After this story, we will have a second story titled The Lighthouse in the Storm. Please enjoy. Swamps, marshes, bogs for miles and miles, in every direction. I hate this place, even if it wasn't for the bugs. Mosquitoes if I'm lucky, deer flies if I'm not. I don't think the locals like me much. Shifty glances nearly every time I leave the house. A glare here, a barely inaudible mumble there. I mostly keep to myself these days. I went for a walk yesterday, and I saw something a little disturbing. I was passing one of the bigger swamps. I think the locals call it the Beast Horn Swamp. It has a huge tree near the center. It splits, dual branches, both reaching for the heavens, both leafless. There was a small trail of rocks rising from the murky water, leading partway into the swamp, ending a few meters from the tree. I followed it. I wanted to get a closer look at the tree. At the end, on the last stone, a small bird. Its throat was ripped open, its legs stretched out at awkward angles, and its eyes gouged out. It didn't look even remotely natural. I retraced my steps and continued on my way. I walked for longer than I intended, and when I started heading back, it was dark. No moon, cloudy sky. Only a few stars. On the way back, I followed the same rock trail. The bird was gone, in its place, a dark stain. I asked one of the locals if he could explain it. I was hoping to set my mind at ease. Maybe a strange predator that did that to its prey. A crocodile attack. Anything. But he just told me that I shouldn't worry. Probably nothing. I noticed his eyes dart to the town hall and quickly back over to me. Then he inquired as to where I had seen it. Beast Horn Swamp, I told him. He didn't reply, but he seemed a little nervous. After a few moments, he left in a rush, faster than I felt was necessary. As he left, I noticed a ragged knife in his belt. I wondered, could a human have attacked the bird? I kept my own company for that night and for the next few nights. I didn't feel like socializing. I started a new painting of the tree in Beast Horn Swamp. It took a while for me to find a good color for the swamp water. I painted some of the swamps and a few dark rain clouds. For dinner, I just ate a few pieces of bread. I wasn't hungry at all. The image of that bird wouldn't leave my mind. It troubled me in my waking hours, and it haunted my dreams. The next time I left my home, it was to go on another walk in hopes of clearing my head. I left earlier than the previous night, hoping to be back before nightfall. Occasionally, my foot would sink into the murk, the ground not particularly supportive. I passed Beast Horn on my way, but I didn't stop. I walked for a few hours, and by the time I turned around, it was the same time I had set out the previous walk. On my way back, I did stop at Beast Horn. I followed the trail of rocks. I was shocked to see the small shape on the last rock. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I had no way to be sure. I walked over slowly. My legs turned to jelly. I almost slipped a few times. When I got to the end of the trail, I was horrified, but not surprised, by what I saw. A small bird, throat torn open, eyes cut out, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. My hands shook as I reached out, fingers grazing its face, caked with blood. I heard a sound across the swamp, on the other side of the tree. I looked over, and I thought I saw something moving under the water. There were tiny waves as well, but I didn't see anything. I assumed it was just a log, maybe a fish. I walked back to my house and stayed there for the rest of the evening. I couldn't sleep, haunted by what I had seen. A few hours after midnight, I decided to go for a walk. Not a long one, just through the village. I walked for a few minutes before I began to approach the town hall. I noticed there were lights coming from the windows. When I stopped, I could hear muffled voices from inside. I crept up to the window. It was open a crack. Through it, I could see into the basement. There were 5 villagers in the center, the rest shuffling around them in a circle. In the center, one of the villagers was holding a small bird. It was struggling, thrashing, but all in vain. Another villager held up a ragged knife, pressing it to the bird's throat. He drew it across the bird's neck, and it began to bleed. The blood gushed out slowly at first, then faster, spilling out onto the floor. The bird's face was twisted in pain, and it fought valiantly to get free, but for nothing. Its struggles grew weaker by the second, until its head began to droop. The villager with the knife then slowly carved out the bird's eyes. He twisted its legs, and I think I heard them crack. I realized I was shaking violently. The townsfolk continued their shuffling circle. They continued for a few minutes, and then the circle broke. The villager who had held the bird took it and headed for the stairs. I stumbled away from the window, a branch cracking under my foot. I dropped to the floor. My heart began to beat faster. Dull thuds from within my chest disturbed the fragile silence. I took great care to slow my breathing and to minimize the rise and fall of my chest with each breath. When I dared to look again, the townsfolk had turned back to the stairs. They began to shuffle out. I scrambled away, hiding in the bushes. Soon the townsfolk came out through the towering double doors of the town hall. They all returned to their homes, except the one who still held the twisted bird. He shuffled out of town. When all the other townsfolk were back in their homes, I crept after him. He moved slowly, and the morning was well on the way by the time he reached his destination. We were exactly where I had expected, the Beast Horn Swamp. The villager went to the end of the rock trail through the swamp. On the last rock, he knelt respectfully. He locked his sunken eyes on the tree and laid the mutilated bird corpse on the rock. He stood up and began to shuffle back to the village. I waited for a few minutes, and then I also began to head back to the village. The next day, I stayed inside all day. As night approached, I headed out to Beast Horn Swamp. I noticed that the bird was still there. I stayed there to watch it. After about an hour, I saw movement. A huge clawed, scaly limb, almost my size, reached out of the water. It pulled in the bird, dragging it into the water, leaving only a tiny stain. I walked home, shaking. I didn't get any sleep that night. The next morning, I kept to myself. I stayed in my home until long after the sun went down. I didn't eat anything. I wasn't very hungry. I waited until past midnight, and I peeked out my window. Nothing. I went outside and walked to the town hall. I hid by the window, still open a crack. The townsfolk were there, shuffling around the dying bird. I watched, transfixed. Then my foot slipped, and I fell against the window. It wasn't as loud as I would have expected, but it was enough. The villagers looked up, and they saw me. The shuffling circle broke, and they began rushing towards the stairs. I took a second to consider, and in hindsight, I think I made the wrong choice. I didn't run off into the swamps. I turned and ran to my house. I pushed my bed against the door, along with all my bookshelves. I didn't block the back window. It didn't occur to me. They haven't come around the house to it though. Soon I will climb through it, and I will run. I write this, hoping that something can be done to stop whatever foul power is at work here, and that it can help others to avoid a fate similar to what I fear lies in my future. This is the second story, The Lighthouse in the Storm. We stood together at the one end of the dock. I could barely see her through the mist, and only during brief flashes of lightning which brightened the dark night. I could hardly hear her over the rain. All things considered, it was not a great place for a conversation. She gestured towards the thin ray of light coming from across the water. "What is it?" I asked, almost having to shout. "It's a lighthouse. My home," she responded. "Can you take me back?" "Sure, as soon as the storm ends," I told her. "I can't take the boat out until the wind dies down. Not when the storm ends. I need to go back now. Please." Her voice was desperate. "I don't even think I can navigate there through the rain," I told her. "I can guide us, but we have to go now," she insisted. "Fine." We climbed into the boat. She pointed into the mist, and I began to row. It was only a few minutes before I started to hear the noises. At first, there was a dreadful sound, like metal being ripped apart. I nearly fell out of the boat. It came out of nowhere, and I was shocked. I asked the girl about it. She turned to me, and she was crying. It was the first time I had seen her face. She was even younger than I had thought, maybe 8. Her face was caked with mud, and she was sobbing. "It's nothing," she told me. "What's wrong?" I asked her. She didn't answer. I kept rowing. Soon I began to hear voices, some slow and calm, others fast and hysterical. I couldn't tell what they were saying. I tried to ignore it. I just wanted to reach the lighthouse and get home. I kept rowing. I wished I had brought a proper jacket. I was freezing to the point of shivering. The girl wasn't shivering. The cold, the weather, didn't seem to bother her at all. I noticed the voices were getting louder. Soon they became screams. I was so cold. I felt my heart beating like a drum. All I wanted was to be home, next to the fire with a cup of hot chocolate. "Can you hear them?" the girl asked me sadly. "I can hear screaming," I told her, "but I can't tell what they're saying." "They're calling for help," she said sorrowfully. "But we can't help them. It's too late for that now." "What do you mean?" I asked, but she didn't respond. After a long silence, she turned back to me. "We're almost there." She was right. After a few seconds, the small boat landed on solid rock. We got out. In between breaks in the fog, I could see a vast lighthouse. I realized that the girl wasn't beside me anymore. "Hello," I called. "I'm over here," came a voice from the mist. I walked toward her, and I found her on the shore. In front of her, leaning out of the water, there was a huge ship, a dead behemoth resting on the shore. There was a huge gash in the front of its hull. "It was horrible," she said dismally. "The water was so cold. Everyone was scared, but I didn't know what was happening. Then I fell through the bottom of the ship. There was a wound in it. I tried to swim back in, but it was like something was holding me down. I struggled, but soon I was out of breath. I opened my mouth. I needed air. I took a deep breath, and soon I felt the water fill my lungs. It was horrible. I started to see points of light. Then everything went black. "Can you take me to the top of the lighthouse?" she asked. "Sure." We walked up to the towering thing, and I opened the door. The doorknob was frigid, covered by a thin layer of frost. Inside, everything was dark. I could hear music from up the stairs. Quiet. A violin. It sounded sad. It was haunting. I tried to tune it out, but I couldn't. It filled my head, pushing away my thoughts. It took me a while to find the stairs. We began to climb. It felt even colder inside the lighthouse. I wanted so badly to be home. The girl was still crying. The sounds of rain hitting the sides of the lighthouse was almost soothing. I realized my hands felt stiff. I looked down at them. There was a thin coating of ice covering my fingers. I kept climbing, going faster and faster. The girl kept pace with me. Soon we were both running. We passed a window, and through it I could see a grand vessel. It was on its side, several huge gashes through its hull. I wanted to feel warm. I wanted to go home. I still do, but I don't think that will happen soon. I'm so cold, and I can feel the mud on my face. This has been Beasthorn Swamp and The Lighthouse in the Storm by Ben Brzezinski. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, consider following, subscribing, or sharing this with others.